What if we could use our body as a tuning fork to tap into the collective consciousness to get information? Would you? What if you could do that right now? Mark Anielski, a well-being economist, discusses the possibility of a brighter future, muscle testing, and how they relate with one another.
When he showed me that, I went, nah, this sounds like magic. Like, I'm a good Catholic. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to believe any of this woo-woo magic stuff, right? So for me, my journey down this rabbit hole was interesting because I was trying to discern whether this was a God-given capacity for discernment. And I'm now convinced that this is a serious gift. It's a serious modality of measurement that I think will change everything in the way we look at investment, we look at anything. If these things are true, as I jokingly said, we actually do have the tricorder. This will change the entire basis of diagnostics in medicine, if you understand what I'm saying. And it's not just me, and anyone can do this.
Today we have with us Mark Anielski. He's joining us, and he wrote a book called The Economics of Happiness. He travels all over the world, meeting with governments and corporations, talking about this philosophy of happiness, wellness, and the economics behind it. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks for having me. I'm very well, thank you.
Good.
And generally happy.
Generally happy. So 10% of our well-being is related to income, education, and where we live. 40% of our well-being is related to belonging, relationships, and a sense of community. COVID. How do you think that's affected maybe the sense of community, relationships, and belonging? Tell me your spin.
Well, I think it's a disaster. If 40% of our well-being comes from the relationships we have with each other, then COVID's been a complete disaster in the with respect to being in the physical space with each other. Of course, that's what we're hardwired to be as human beings, is to be in relationship. Obviously it's had enormous challenges, which is an interesting study. And how many months have we been at this now, where we can't hug each other, and of course there's all kinds of debate about how real this is and all that, but
right.
It's been a fascinating experiment, given this is a global situation. So I would say that 40% of happiness that comes from relationships is, which was the variable I said is the thing that we can most affect, because your childhood and your upbringing, right? That's kind of, you're already hardwired there. I mean, you can overcome some of the trauma you had as a child and the environment you grew up in. But the fact that 40% is that attribute that you can affect intentionally, right? Create the conditions for relationships of trust, then one wonders whether we have done great damage to that really important asset of trust.
Yes, I agree. I went to a party for the first time in a while last Saturday, and it wasn't a large party. It was just like 13 people. They were all fairly close. But we didn't wear masks. We got to hug. We got to shake hands. But it was so refreshing. And just because we could hug people, because we could shake their hands, because we didn't have something over our face where we couldn't see the other person's expression.
But I guess it has reminded us of the importance of those the social or social nature, right? And and questioning whether. So I mean, there's so many attributes of this in the health domain that are really quite remarkable. We'll look back on it and be studying it forever. They say these major crises, like whether it's a tsunami or a ice storm in Montreal, or floods, bring people together at the worst of times. So this is why this one's really interesting, because it's actually not in a way bringing us together.
Right. It's a crisis and we
actually,
can't come together.
it's kept us isolated,
Right.
with fear of, well, I might pass it on to my grandparents or my parents, and they may suffer mortality. So interesting state of collective anxiety and fear.
So tell me, you mentioned briefly some maybe concepts based around like metaphysics and energetics. Can you speak a little bit on that?
Well, first of all, I'm pretty fussy about the etymological roots of words. So if we go back, even people say, well, why did you write the book, The Economics of Happiness? And I said, well, there's two important words. How do you bring economy and happiness together? Well, actually, the common root is well-being, because economy means in Greek household stewardship. So household stewardship is about the well-being of the members of the household. That's what the word wealth actually means in the Old English. It means the conditions of well-being. And in Greek, the word happiness, eudaimonia, means well-being of your spirit, or well-being of your soul. So isn't that interesting? So with my accounting background, it's like, well, what is then wealth accounting if not well-being accounting? And how do you measure the well-being of your spirit? Well, that's going to be tricky, right? I mean, how can I ever evaluate the condition of your soul? No. What about energetically? What about so-called consciousness? Well, what is consciousness? And having studied the work of David R. Hawkins, clinical psychiatrist in New York, he developed his PhD thesis on the possibility that consciousness itself could be measured, because everything is frequency. If you study the chakras, and if you look at the seven chakras, they all have a frequency profile. Everything in creation has a frequency, including say a virus has a frequency address or profile. So then we get into this, Dr. Bruce Lipton's work and the biology of belief,
Right.
a geneticist saying, whatever I pay attention to, I affect the field of that petri dish by my intention. Well, what's happening is you're affecting it with your consciousness. What's consciousness? Well, you could say, Hawkins would say, consciousness is your degree of awareness of divinity, of your relationship with the divine. And he argued that consciousness follows a logarithmic statistical curve, that from 1 to 1,000, you develop a normative or logarithmic scale. Whether that's the right numbers or not, he said, isn't it interesting? I'll just say it's 1 to 1,000, and 1,000 is the highest possible vibration frequency that a human being can achieve, i.e. enlightenment. So whoever achieved that, Jesus, maybe Buddha, and other mystics. And so they were in a state of so-called bliss, or, enlightened awareness. So you put that all back together and you say, well, is it possible to measure the frequency of something? And the answer is probably yes. And how do you do that? So applied kinesiologists or naturopathic doctors have used protocols called muscle testing or dowsing. And what is that? Well, that's just your body as a tuning fork picking up on the frequency of something. So it could be holding two apples and saying which apple is vibrating at a higher frequency for my body. And you can essentially discern whether even you should eat apples, let alone eat, this Granny Smith apple or this Fuji, whatever, species it is.
Do they have instruments out there right now that can actually detect that sort of frequency? Whether it be in, apples, fruits.
Well, this is the
supplements.
question. This is the question I'm asking. I just heard Sasha Stone, who you may know. Sasha Stone is in Bali, but he just interviewed a couple, Elena Benzinoff from holistic.com, she's based in Florida. She's originally from the Ukraine, and her colleague Alejandra, who claim that they have technology called scalar wave technology to be able to measure consciousness, not just of food, but of anything, persons, organizations, movements, presidents, whatever you, again, using Hawkins scale. So my question to Elena has been, what what do you mean by scalar wave technology? Because we know that we ourselves are scalar wave technology. Like our bodies are those tuning forks. So what we call calibration, I can calibrate the integrity of food, the integrity of land or soil, anything based on these protocols that Hawkins developed, which says you ask the question in the scientific methods. That's you state a hypothesis. The sky is blue, or Lauren has a cat, Lauren has a dog, and you don't have to respond to that question, but the field knows what the answer is because you're already telling me the answer through your body language, your frequency that's coming off of that question. So that's what Hawkins said is possible. So we are then the instruments.
Okay.
Which raises all kinds of amazing questions. What do you mean? So you can discern then. Some people would say, well, my discernment is through prayer. I ask God and I get the answer. I also believe that, but I also believe that this tool of discernment is in all of us.
Right.
And Hawkins said, he argued that only people above a certain level, I mean, this is where it gets interesting, this level called 200. So you got 0 to 1,000. The lower realms are fear and apathy, those lower realms that I think a lot of us find ourselves in during COVID. And then 200 is this level called integrity, above which you get into higher levels of consciousness, into courage and love. But those above 200, he said, they're capable of muscle testing or calibration. But those below generally are blocked. Why? Because they don't believe it. They just don't believe it's possible because they're stuck in this lower vibration, apathy, fear, loathing, greed, which if you look at the world, it's like, I wonder where we find those pockets of conscious. And that, so it gets very interesting because it's logarithmic.
Can't be in the lower vibration of fear and greed and loathing, but also believe in muscle testing and make that effective.
You could. Now, again, this is all based on, this is one guy who's now deceased, right?
Gotcha.
Who not many people have either heard of. I've got all of his books. I've read everything that he wrote because I was fascinated with, because I'm a measurement guy, right? I'm obsessed with, can we measure everything? So that's what drives me. And I thought he's onto something. And my naturopathic doctor taught me how to do this. He said, well, I use this with my patients. Some may not believe me. If I say, look, I'm here because I want to tweak my diet. And my friend would say, well, I can do the muscle testing right here on the foods you should eat or not eat based on their vibrational profile. Or I can do it discreetly without you knowing and give you the prescription. Here's your, So, it's interesting because some people say, oh, that is just complete nonsense and woo-woo. I said, really? So let us go talk to our quantum physics friends and see those who talk about the field, right? Which I'm not a physicist, so, but I know physicists are catching up to this possibility.
Yeah, one of my first books I read was Biology of Belief. That's Bruce Lipton, right?
Lipton, yeah.
Yeah. And
which is amazing, right? Here's a guy he doesn't come from a faith position. He comes from a science position, and he's blown away as a scientist, right?
Yeah, I love his book. That my interpretation was that the first part of it was, these are how cells work on a microscopic level, and then about halfway through the book, he goes to this chiropractor who performs muscle testing on him, which he finds absolutely and totally unbelievable. And then the second half of his book basically supports in the metaphysical or energetic way, supports the first half of his book.
I got it.
It's amazing. And now, of course, he's all over the place because, he's, well, yeah.
And he's, look at the joy in his face. He's just lit up about life. And that's the way I feel. People say, well, how come you're always so blissed out? I said, because life is so spectacular that if these things are true, as I jokingly said, we actually do have the tricorder. this will change the entire basis of diagnostics in medicine. If you understand what I'm saying. And it's not just me, and anyone can do this.
Right.
So I'm not even selling you technology. I'm not selling you the device. I could teach you.
Mhm.
So then as a practitioner, I've said, well, if I apply these protocols to anything, I can build unbelievable spreadsheets. I love spreadsheets.
Okay.
So I can assess the consciousness. There's this conversation, conscious capitalism. It's like, who are the conscious capitalists? What do you mean? On Hawkins scale? Okay, then I would probably only want to do business with companies that are above 200.
Okay.
Which companies are in the 25 to 50 zone? Banks, financial institutions. Makes sense because it's a greed-based, money-based system. Do I want to do business with them? I could get invited to measure their well-being, change the workplace culture, modulate up because of the logarithmic scale, moving up, right? An incremental number is difficult because you're going up a logarithmic scale. But what people experience, like Lipton, when you experience an awakening, an awareness, you move up that scale. And you can try to stay there, but sometimes the world will pull you back down because the world is slipping back into a lower frequency.
Right.
Hence, when you look at COVID, what is it? Well, it's clearly, I would call it a percussion of fear. However it came about, it's still a condition of fear. And so naturally, the human consciousness is going to modulate downwards.
Right. There was a show I was watching a number of years ago where they had some sort of computer program and little sensors placed all over the world. Excuse me. That somehow, in some way, could measure consciousness, like global consciousness in that particular region that the sensors were placed. And any large event that took place leading up to that, but before that occurrence actually happened, there was a shift. So they could actually document that there was a change in these computers, and then that occurrence would happen. There would be the shift, and then this occurrence would happen, and then it'd kind of go from there. But it
would
um,
precede the shift, though. You could
yeah,
measure which is
yeah,
like saying when you pray, it's like in the quantum field. When you pray, it's actually instantaneous, but there's probably going to be a lag, right? In some type of measurement sense.
gotcha, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the more and more I learn about this, it seems that we are all connected to amazing information. I mean, I know one of the first, I was talking to this guy who was very extremely intuitive. And I said, hey, you should check out this book. And that book actually did happen to be Biology of Belief by Bruce Lipton. And he starts doing muscle testing on himself. And he's like, yeah. I was like, what do you mean? Yeah. He goes,
Yeah.
I'm getting a 20%. What do you mean you're getting a 20%? He goes, well, I mean, I'm pretty far down the rabbit hole. I've read a lot of books. And for me to read that book, he says it's only seems to be like 20% worth my time. And I said, you're doing that with your fingers? You're doing that with your fingers? He goes, well, I'm muscle testing, I'm not discrediting the book in any way because it's an amazing book, but that was my first stepping stone. And this guy obviously had been in that realm, knows this information on some level for many years. And for him, that book didn't resonate with him. And he was muscle testing it at 20%. And I was like, oh my God. So not only can you determine whether this particular book that I'm just stating to you that you really have no tangible knowledge of is a good read, but you can actually determine what percentage scale that would be helpful to you. He goes, yeah, that's right. He goes, usually I only read books that register at about 60% or higher. So I was like,
Wow.
oh my
I like
gosh, dude.
I like this guy. I like his, but he's making my point is whatever criterion you use. I mean, think about this, right? I'm a forester, so how, and I'm trying to measure the value of a forest. So in other words, it's integrity. Well, what are the criterion for integrity of a complex ecosystem? Indicator species, pH of soil,
Mhm.
carbon, maybe all those things. So that's a huge spreadsheet of variables. And so what he's saying is interesting. Now, what Hawkins would do is he would actually say the book I just wrote calibrates at 800 on my scale.
Gotcha.
So his first book, Power versus Force, calibrated at a lower scale on his scale, right? But his later books were, I would say, were spiritually sublime. They're just like, you read them, you're like, it's like reading some mystic's diary about, God experience. But I give credit to this fellow who says, well, for my purpose, if I'm going to calibrate my whole library and
Mhm.
it's only 70% complete, then I'm going to look for that, right? That 30% more. Or I'm going to, as with all my books, I write the consciousness in the front page of the book. I mean, some people would say that consciousness is just this notion of gut feel. Do you feel good? Do you feel like, oh, I really don't like that person? Or, well, what is it that you don't like about that person? Is it their consciousness? Is it their energy? Is it their auric field? Is like, what are you picking up on? Right. That's giving you dis-ease in your spirit, in your energetic field. Right. Um, anyway, so I find it a lot of fun where I can calibrate my entire library and probably throw out certain authors. I'm like, you know what? Uh, I know.
So how do you calibrate your library? Like what tools do you use? Do you use muscle testing to
Yeah.
calibrate? Okay. Okay.
So muscle testing, my old my forestry buddy from forestry school, uh, he was the first one to teach me like this simple finger.
Right.
So you press as hard as you can and you make a statement. And if it
Right.
breaks through, I mean, it sounds like
It's a
someone
no
looking and
longer the
going,
read,
"Oh,
right?
come on, you're just like faking it." It's like, no, okay, you can do this thing. And I'm like, when he showed me that, I went, nah, this sounds like magic. Like, I'm a good Catholic. I'm a Christian. I'm not going to believe any of this woo-woo magic stuff. Right. So for me, my journey down this rabbit hole was interesting because I was trying to discern whether this was a God-given capacity for discernment.
Right.
And that's where it gets really complicated is you cannot, in my opinion, ask about the conscience of another person without asking their permission. In other words,
Right.
how do I ask their permission? Well, I can ask God, I can ask their guardian angels. I can, those are the protocols that I was also taught by some of my teachers. Otherwise, what happens is you get caught in the potential of judgment and ego. Or other people come to you and say, could you calibrate this person for me? Should I do business with them? And I'm like, no, that's not, I'm not going to tell you who to do business with. I can do that myself. I can decide who, based on my readings. So for me, my naturopathic doctor I said, well, how do you do it? Because Hawken never tells you how to do it, which is interesting.
Huh.
He
Okay.
shows you, the only thing you can find on YouTube is a terrible video of him with another person doing the arm, right? This
Gotcha.
strong arm, weak arm thing. So,
Right.
you can hold a cup of coffee and I can put two fingers. You say, hold your arm as strong as you can. If that coffee's not good for you, your arm will go weak, no matter how, right? Which is another way of doing it. Or the use of, some would call it dowsing, the old water witching, like,
Right.
but dowsing using a pendulum. So the pendulum then is the modality I use. And
Okay.
that is basically like your tuning fork, and it has so the way you do that is you have to, it's like a plumb bob, right? You can just have any plumb bob, really. It could be any, some people say, oh, you need a certain material, you need a certain crystal, or you need balsa wood because it doesn't pick up as much energy from because there's energy in our auric field that's right, of course, affecting even the calibration. So you need something materially benign kind of thing.
Right.
But
Yeah, I
so,
have a washer on a thin string.
yeah, wash exactly. So I could spend a lot
I
of money
have,
on.
I do have challenges, or have in the past. I don't like to put it in the present because I don't want to affirm that. But I have had challenges um, doing muscle testing on myself.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's
I know absolutely
someone you
beyond
love.
a doubt that it is works and it's extremely effective. When people work with me on muscle testing, I can feel it in my body right away, whether that's whatever question or supplement or food or anything were happening to me. I can tell whether it's congruent, and it's crazy because it's night and day, and it's really powerful, and it is
Wow,
jaw dropping. And I can use,
you can
I
feel it
almost
without
always
even.
could feel that prior to the person doing an arm test or whatever sort of um, testing that they're doing on me. Um, when I do it on myself, I often do get in my head, and it is a little more challenging. Um,
I agree, especially when, like, it's one thing to, like, when people say, well, what's your consciousness? Well, I'm not going to calibrate my own consciousness. I mean, I could, but you know that, right? Your things are going to get messed up in your own field, your expectations. But it is interesting, or someone that's really close to you, like your parents or whatever, your loved ones, right? That's where they say you have to be careful, and that's where I think the practice gets interesting. If we have, you know, if we're all let's say we have a group of practitioners who can do this, then we can basically blind verify our readings. And I've done this with a colleague lately, and that's interesting because, like, so why is there a discrepancy between your reading of someone and my reading of somebody?
hmm.
Is it plus or minus 10, 15, 50 basis points? Which makes a difference because it's logarithmic scale. So what explain that? Um, that becomes, so I think as a practice, so some of us have talked about building a medical, almost like an alternative healing practice where we would have a whole range of services from, diet to Akashic record reading, or if you want, right, to these other kind of calibrated assessments. But we would be doing it, the assessments individually and blind to the others, so not being affected by their field. If this is a serious discipline, again, Hawkins kind of leaves us hanging because gives us this incredible thesis, and the fact that you haven't read it, or I mean that doesn't matter, but he, I would say, is the probably the most uncelebrated scientist of the 20th century,
Hmm.
because he grasped quantum physics in its, I think, in its full simplicity. And so for me, then it, we go into, like, if there's any woo-woo stuff for me, it's like the power of love, like the power of intention, the power of prayer. That's all happening too within the quantum field, and the possibilities for healing through love is absolutely real to me. So
Yes.
that's the other piece for me. But you're right, it's like, so calibrating yourself is like, I'd rather have my friend calibrate and like, how high you are, like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. Or do you know how low that person is? It's like, it
So, what are
doesn't
the
matter.
different methods of muscle testing or getting that sort of feedback? I mean, you mentioned like pendulum or muscle testing. There's a practitioner friend of mine uses a device called a Syra, um, which is, it's a little computer, and you hooked up a little. I guess it's called like a lie detector. Lie
Yeah,
detector.
yeah. Or
It can sense your emotion or your subconscious.
there you go. Well, maybe
Uh,
that's that scalar wave device that they're talking about. I don't
Maybe.
know.
And from what I understand, that technology has been around since the 50s. There's been very little done, and I just don't understand if it's as effective as I believe it is, and it sounds like you believe it is. Why aren't devices like that just all over the place, being used, utilized?
Is that a rhetorical question?
Well, yeah, I guess that is.
I just said, I think I just claimed that if these modalities without devices are available to all of us, it would change the medical profession
Yes, yes.
instantly.
So there we have it.
So
That's the
there's,
reason.
there's
We
too
wouldn't
many
want that
vested.
to happen, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the other thing is like, it makes sense. Like as again, as an economist, guy who studied the whole money system my whole life and taught from an energy, not just energy, but the mechanics of how money is created. You come to realize that this is all about maintaining control of the matrix or the system that is in their interest to control. And so without bias, it's like, look, it makes sense from a business perspective. You maintain control by controlling the nature and issuance of money, the nature and issuance of energy, you know, fossil fuels, and you start to put all these things together, and you're like, gosh, like, so why did we crawl away from the tree of life? Like, why did we rebel against this truth of abundance and
Right.
and decide to immerse ourselves in this what I call the lie of scarcity, right? The illusion, right? And knowing that death is not the end. All these things, like you sort of, when I try to put Humpty back together again, like, makes sense that there are people and systems in place who never want these gifts of the spirit, as St. Paul talked about, to come to full fruition, because it would be the end of the control or the system that they benefited from. And I'm saying they because I think there doesn't take that many to build and maintain a system. My whole focus tends to be on follow the money, right? And so follow the money means follow the system which creates the money, maintains the money system, and as an accountant does not create money in relation to well-being whatsoever. Because if they did, none of us would go to sleep anxious ever again. There'd be no such thing as not enough money for a living wage to do what you're supposed to do. So that's kind of the work I've been doing and writing about that. And then from a high scale physics or even just a pragmatic accounting perspective. Because money is energy.
Things that you had mentioned in some of your other interviews. The secret to happiness is to want what you already have and to live the life that you have already been given. I think that's pretty fantastic.
And that was given to me. I was doing a keynote and someone brought up a tea bag, a Chinese green tea bag, and that was written on the tea bag.
Oh, okay.
I said, it sounds like Lao Tzu. That sounds like, Taoism or I Ching, right? And it is, because it's like you read Lao Tzu stuff, and I've been in China. I've spent a lot of time in China and teaching, and I throw up those lines to my Chinese students. They've never read it. Like,
right.
To live the life you've already been given. Wow. Okay. Why do you want that Land Rover, that nice shiny black Audi? Oh,
Right.
because you think we in the West are so happy with all our materialism. No, because we have spiritual poverty. We actually don't know what happiness is in the Greek.
Right.
So I think that's where, again, the happiness goes back to, what does the word happiness actually mean?
Yeah. So
And then if we put muscle,
definition is spiritual well-being. Is that right?
oi means well-being, oi daimonia. So daimon means spirit.
Okay.
So EU, the letters EU means well-being. So well-being of spirit. Even Aristotle, what's interesting, I've read several papers about what Aristotle wrote. Nicodemean ethics. I think that's where he kind of delves into happiness. But it's like, why wouldn't this Greek philosopher not start with his own Greek language that, right, it etymologically breaks down into those two words? And he goes off and defines happiness by, life of good friends and a contented old age and virtuous activity. And all these are, criterion, this algorithm for happiness. But what does it mean, again, to be well in your spirit?
So when you speak or when you go out and consult, what are like, how do you create a society that is spiritually healthy and I guess self-sustaining? I guess that's part of it.
Yeah,
What are some of the tools or concepts or ideas that you might share to help that particular group or company or government or region to make better choices?
that's my IP. It's worth $1 million. I'm not just kidding.
Okay.
That's why you hire me. I'm your well-being doctor. So what I get hired, like people say, well, what do you do for business? Well, I get hired to conduct a well-being assessment of a community or an organization. I haven't had many corporate clients because I don't know, maybe corporate clients don't want to replace their financial bottom line with the well-being ROI, which is what my argument is. What does a company exist? Presumably to improve the well-being conditions in the communities it lives and serves. And it can hold itself accountable for it, because every business person knows, good business is about good relationships of trust. So I'll park that one. That's my aspiration, to have companies become well-being corporations. But in communities, municipalities, going to advise, the nation of China on their well-being economy. And so that requires us to conduct a baseline well-being assessment, as if you're going to get your annual checkup with a doctor. So we're going to do the diagnostics, the conventional statistics on well-being. And I have 5, being the accounting guy I have 5 capital asset classes: human, social, cultural, natural capital, built capital, and financial capital. And all those capital assets can be measured in quantitative and qualitative terms. So the quantitative is like taking your blood pressure and doing the blood work and of a society, of a community, with tons and tons of statistics, and gives you a little profile sheet of how you are relative to maybe your state or province or whatever neighbors you want to compare yourselves with.
Okay.
Married with a subjective well-being survey, which asks people to self-rate their life satisfaction, their joy, their hope. Do they feel they make enough income? Do you sleep well at night? Do you feel good about your diet? Do you trust your neighbors, your local business, your politicians, and to define the relationship they have with friends, families, and neighbors? So I take all that data together and I create that well-being report for them, as if I'm preparing financial statements, but I'm preparing a state of well-being report. Now they can literally take that and build a business plan or a budget around that.
Wow.
And they could even think about creating their own sovereign, there's like a trust wealth fund or their own bank, right? Because if money creation is a derivative of well-being conditions, then boom. And First Nations or Indigenous people here in Canada, there's 640 of them, are called nations. So they're already sovereign. They can do exactly what I just said. So that's who I work with primarily.
Wow.
Little First Nations, 300 to 6,000 to 10,000 is the biggest one, like the Navajo, and say, we'll construct literally a national well-being economy framework for you that's the equivalent of Singapore or Norway, right? With your own bank, with your own trust fund or wealth fund, and with your own well-being accounting protocols in place, aligned specifically to what we call the genuine wealth, meaning your values, your core values, and your laws, not the colonizers' laws, which came from Britain and Rome, your laws. And that's it. And you can bring me back next year if you want. You can't fire me. I've already delivered my report. And look, I'm agnostic. I'm just your doctor. I can tell you what to do now. Here's your checkup.
Very interesting. Wow. Well, that's a pretty cool job you have.
It's fun.
And I guess it all started with the book, correct?
No, it started way before. The book was just Economics of Happiness was really my this is the first book, 2007. I was steeped in, I worked in the finance ministry in Alberta here. And so I saw that big picture. I knew GDP accounting. I knew national income accounting systems. I swam in that. So even back then, I knew Robert Kennedy in 1968 said, we're not measuring the things that make life worthwhile. We're measuring economic growth, GDP, as if that's the only thing that matters to the nation. But we've never asked the question about the integrity of our political discourse or the joy of our children's play, as if you can measure those things. But he's basically pointing out that just measuring how much money changes hands, which is what the GDP does, is a flawed measure of progress. And I went, yeah, of course, Bobby, like how would this politician possibly get that aha and give that at a speech, a few months before he was shot at Kansas City? And that statement, what has been my sort of flashpoint credo, so to speak.
Wow.
So yes, we can address Robert's challenges, measure well-being, build different ways of measuring the progress of nations, tie that directly into monetary policy, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Canada. And then the nightmare's over. Maybe. Depends on who you elect as president. Nope, that actually doesn't matter either. It will take courage for all of us to walk to develop, co-create this economy well-being. But we won't do it when we're caught up in emotion and anxiety and fear. We have to tell the truth.
Wow.
Which is where muscle testing comes in again. Qui cum qui vera, what is true? Well, Hawkins says you can calibrate that.
It seems as if we can. Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm just glad the fact that you muscle test is the other thing I was going to say is what happens to me often is, because I've done it so often, like, and you might get this too, is when you make that statement in your head, you say from 0 to 1,000 or whatever, the number just pops in your head like that, like a flash. But normally what then happens is I doubt the number. And so I have to take out the pendulum and verify the number. And I'm like,
right,
look, the number was there. It was 545.5. Like, goodness sakes, how much more accurate do you want it? And
yeah. So, I mean, I didn't believe in any of this stuff just a couple of years ago, really. I mean, truly. And I do believe in this stuff now. However, I'm still bound by a particular belief system. So I have a hard time, even though I know it experiences time and time and time again. It's still jaw dropping when it occurs.
It is.
It really is. And it shouldn't be. I mean, I should be like, oh, well, this is real and an everyday thing, because it is real and it is an everyday thing. But even me, who's trying to preach this stuff, I'm like, wow, how could this possibly work? And a part of me also is like,
which is great, Lauren. Like, I think that's such an important statement. I mean, what you just said, I mean, I went through the same thing. How could it possibly work? I must be deluded. I must be, maybe distracted by darker entities or whatever, because this possibly can't be so efficient. How could it be possibly so efficient?
Right.
And yet I gave it up like 3 years ago. I said, I'm not doing it anymore. And it was only because I connected with these American friends during COVID that I'm like, I'm gonna test the water. I'm gonna ask some of these folks who are, I mean, they're way high up there. They're, you know, they're people who produce The Social Dilemma on Netflix. You know, they've been in that system, and the women in this group are amazing. So they're, maybe they'll laugh at me, but maybe they won't. And so we went down this rabbit hole, and I'm now convinced that this is a serious gift. It's a serious modality of measurement that I think will change everything in the way we look at investment, we look at anything. And why not try it? Why not give it a go? Why? And if you need technology, if there's these scalar wave technologies, or, you know, I still don't know how you can find an app that can measure the consciousness of, you know, Google or something
Right.
through this device. I mean, I'd be intrigued if there is, but I don't know how this is picking up on that scalar, on that quantum field.
Right.
Called Google, and all the people that make up Google or whatever. So I still want to, if there is, great, awesome. I'd love to see the technology, but just don't sell it for $1 million, because I can tell you that I bet you I'm faster than this device.
Right. Exactly. And we all have it within us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, this website that I'm putting together, I feel like that's one of my skepticism is one of the reasons I feel like that people will be able to relate to me, is because, I used to poke fun at a lot of this stuff. Um, and I wasn't part of my belief system. And so I get where most people are.
Mhm.
Um, and I just want to be able to say, just, try it, experience it. And if it works, fantastic. I think you'll find that it will. And if it doesn't work, there's no harm done.
Yeah, there's
Um,
no harm. Is like, just because, yeah, it doesn't work for you.
right.
You know, there's others. I mean, I have a lot of solace in, when St. Paul says we all have many gifts, the body has many parts, right? And we all have different gifts. And so it doesn't matter, in a way, that, the fact that I can do this, and others can now. So that makes me happy, because I'm not alone. I don't feel like
Right.
I'm a nutter. And it's sobering to talk to someone like you. Is like, okay, we could talk very calmly about this, right? We're not like, woo, flipping off. And, if Dr. Bruce was online, he'd be like smiling and laughing and like, what kind of drugs are you on, man? Like, no, he's just high on life, right?
Yeah. You know, a couple of years ago, I didn't believe in any of this, and now I have so many friends. I'm in so many loops of people that can actually go inside and experience people, like where they can tell you where they're hurting, where their ailments are. They could see stuff, they could tell you stuff, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is a world of fantasy, but it's not.
So,
you know,
turning this question to you, then, I guess that the question is one of, like, if there's a legitimacy to an evolving practice, you with your family history of medicine, and um, what do you feel is possible?
um, well, I mean, I see some people around me opening their eyes a little bit, and with people that I never thought would even do that. Um, my father actually went to acupuncture, and he's doing acupuncture now. And that's he used to send me tapes written by medical journals saying that acupuncture was just garbage. And these are like,
Just
this,
Chinese folklore, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And now he's going to these acupuncturists. Um, I did some muscle testing on him a while back. I didn't have a whole lot of luck, but I did have one hint of luck. It was interesting. So, and he was pulling his full force into it. Like he was muscle testing like you're not supposed to. It's not really to overcome the other person, but that's what he was doing. And some things weren't really working out so well, but I handed him my phone, and because the phone has a lot of stuff coming off of it, and it's generally not good for the body at all.
No, it's a lot
So
of
I,
EMF.
I, I put the phone up to his body, and he was still rock solid. And I was like, okay. And then I grabbed the phone, took it away from his body, and he didn't know this, but I at that point turned it on. And then I put the phone up to his body, and his arm went right down. And I was like, okay, well, that's what your phone does to you. And he goes, what just happened? I said, I gave you the phone before and it was off and you were strong. Now I just gave you the phone. Now I turned it on, and you don't have control over your arm. You have no strength in your arm. That's what your phone does to you. So on the scale from 1 to 1,000 that you're talking about, where does love fall? Is that so?
500.
Love is like 580 or 420.
No, 500 is love. So 400 to 499.9 is reason. So that's where like the smartest scientists are, like Einstein, and some of them, Hawkins said, are literally stuck at 499.9. So, but the interest, so that 500 then to 540, 540 is a level of joy. 600 is bliss, right? And then 600 or 1,000 is like hardly, not many people go into those levels. Mother Teresa was 740. There's not many people who are in, those very, very high frequencies, which would be just like ecstatic, like spiritually ecstatic. The zone of like complete surrender and abandonment, blissed out. Ecstasami in Latin, to be out of ecstasy, to be out of your mind. That's what it means, right? Which makes sense. If you had a spiritual blissful experience, you're just giddy. You're not rational. That's what I believe in. It's like love will heal. Yeah, love is the healing. That it is our nature. So there's really not much more to say other than just love each other.
Well, are there any closing remarks, statements that you wanted to, or messages that you wanted to, share?
I'm just thrilled to have this conversation. You won't find me talking about this a lot on YouTube or in my presentations, because I think like Tony Robbins sort of kept it, kept it discreet with respect to people who might, as my wife would say, maybe dismiss you from being the economist you're known for.
Right.
So I think that itself is an interesting reflection for all of us. Is like my reflection is when we individually start to talk about our spiritual experiences, or whether it was in childhood, right? I think we find more in common than not. And I think that's worth opening up and talking more openly with each other about. And then we're like, so when I saw an angel, I wasn't, crazy, and so I think that to me is encouraging that these kind of conversations are happening. Yes. In a measured, sober, way. So thank you. Right. Thank you for creating the space with all the interruptions.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lord.
I really appreciate it, Mark.
You're welcome.